I think most people agree that the needle is pointing upwards for the San Francisco 49ers. You've got a young head coach in Kyle Shanahan. You have a young new general manager in John Lynch, who seems to have a decent grasp for his role and responsibilities. You've got a team that is starting to amass some young talent, even though they still have a ways to go. But the biggest thing they did was that midseason trade to acquire Jimmy Garoppolo. And feel like, based off of his 5 starts, that the team won every one of them, that the 49ers could be staring down the barrel of potentially the face of their franchise going forward. Now, I still caution, even though everybody wants to automatically hop on the Jimmy G train, that was 5 starts at the end of a season. Let's see him make it through an entire season healthy, and let's see him make it through an entire season and produce at a certain level. Because you're going to have him do that, because the team had no choice, really, but to give him the big-time contract that they ultimately did. And I want to make sure I point this out again, is that ultimately this draft is very much about Jimmy Garoppolo. Not just in terms of the players that they took with their first 2 picks, but the second-round pick they didn't have because they gave it up to acquire Garoppolo. If Garoppolo ends up being the real deal for the 49ers for the foreseeable future, then this draft was a raging success, because that means the team would have acquired a franchise quarterback for the next decade and only had to use a second-round pick to get him. That is a success by any single logical measurement there is. But I did feel like in this draft that the team needed to get better around Jimmy G. He doesn't just walk on water. He's got to have some talent around him. So ultimately, I was surprised, but really not that surprised, when they went on the offensive line and they took McGlinchey number 9. We really shouldn't be all that surprised, as they had already brought in Richard Sherman in free agency, which they would hope would help shore up the corner position. You've invested multiple picks in the first round on your defensive line in Eric Armstead and DeForest Buckner, and last year's first-round pick Solomon Thomas. You probably need to move off and address other areas of your team now. So, thinking about the long term here, knowing especially that they were trading Trent Brown, knowing that Joe Staley is nearing the end of his career, this team needed to get better on the offensive line, even if some 49ers fans are kind of flummoxed by the pick, stunned by the pick, or even a little bit, dare we say, upset by the pick. It makes some sense. Now, that said, McGlinchey was not, to me, the best player available at this point by any stretch of the imagination, and I worry sometimes about teams that take guys based off of need and not off of best player available, not off of how their board falls. Now, if their board fell that way, then it feels like them saying McGlinchey was the best player available was more that they were wanting it to be instead of the actual reality of what it is. How many people thought that Mike McGlinchey was the absolute best player on the board at the draft at this point? I'm just saying. So it feels like it was a reach, and it was still a reach to me, to address need. It feels like similar to a couple of years ago when the Titans traded back up from 15 to 8 in order to get Jack Conklin. That is exactly what this feels like. It feels like that 2016 type of situation. Now, Conklin is a good player. Conklin is also a right tackle. And while it is important for both of your tackles to be able to play, I look at McGlinchey and I'm worried about whether he can really truly stick at left tackle long term and play at a high level, or if he's better suited being a high-end right tackle like a Jack Conklin. So, is that worth spending the 9th overall pick in the draft for? I don't necessarily believe so. Only time will tell. But now you've cleared out a spot. McGlinchey's going to be penciled in on the right side initially, which is where he needs to be. And we'll see how it works out. I was really surprised that they traded up for Dante Pettis like they did. I know there are a lot of people that looked at him. He's a good athlete. He's a smooth, fluid athlete. pretty good route runner, but I didn't know that he was necessarily dynamic as a receiver. And I was surprised that they traded up to get him in the middle of round 2 when you had a guy like Anthony Miller sitting on the board. Now, if they felt like Pettis could give them impact as a return guy, impact as a slot receiver, I get it and I understand the pick. But again, to me, there were better players on the board and there were also better receivers on the board. So while I applaud the effort to try and improve the offense around Jimmy G, which was absolutely necessary, I can't help but think that this team reached on their first 2 picks, and that's not usually a great formula for success in the draft, is to have multiple reaches with your high picks, but that's what it feels like to me, my opinion. Now, round 3, I thought they did pretty well for themselves. Fred Warner, the linebacker from BYU. I know some people might have had like late first, early mid-second round grades on him. I felt like he's more of like a third-round guy. Plug him in as the weak side linebacker, and he can make some plays happen. I don't think he's dynamic or special, but I do think he's potentially a future NFL starter, as is Tarvarius Moore, the safety from Southern Miss. This is a guy that climbed quite a bit throughout the draft process, and it feels like a guy that you can plug in the future, and he takes over Eric Reed's old job. Then I look at DJ Reed in round 5. I thought he was a really solid pickup. You've got Sherman and Witherspoon on the outside. DJ Reed could be your starting slot corner in the future. I like that. I even liked Richie James in the 7th round from Middle Tennessee State. I felt like he was actually a little underrated in this process. Not the biggest guy, but he's got some speed and he can make some plays happen. 7th round, give me a lot of that. But I ultimately, again, come back to this 49ers draft and the way it broke down. And I say to myself, they reached in the top 10 for a Jack Conklin type of right tackle. They reached, to me, in round 2 by trading up to get a guy like Dante Pettis. Now, it may pan out and it doesn't matter, and if that's the case, then that's fine. But right now, it feels like the 49ers could have gotten better talent, better players, even if they would have ended up being on the defensive side of the ball. I'm curious, 49ers fans, at pick 9. Would you rather have Mike McGlinchey or somebody like Derwin James or Tremaine Edmonds, somebody like that? Maybe Minkah Fitzpatrick. I'm just asking. I feel like I know what the answer might be. But, like I said before, as much as anything else, if they get any of these other picks to pan out, and they have to hope that they do, then that's great. But this still ultimately comes down to this draft was about Jimmy G because of the 2nd round pick they gave up to get him. And if he does become the franchise quarterback, even if this draft class largely craps the bed, it still has to be considered a success to get a franchise quarterback for a 2nd round pick.